ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
This is Conversations with Rudy Bremer on ABC Radio.
I have a personal connection to the work of my guest today. When I was in Year 12, I had the chance to go to the University of Sydney for a week-long study camp. It wasn't just any study camp, though. It was for all the Aboriginal kids doing their HSC around the state. I remember it so vividly. It's one of those moments in time that just seemed to change the way I saw my future. Because suddenly, university wasn't just an abstract idea. It could be real. My guest today, Jack Manning Bancroft, knows all about how powerful these experiences can be. As a little kid, he moved out of inner city Sydney to Bundjalung country, where his mum's from. And he saw with his own eyes how his opportunities in the city far outweighed those on offer in the bush. Later, when Jack was at uni, he had his own epiphany about creating pathways for Indigenous kids. He created a program called the Australian Indigenous Mentoring Experience, AIM. And now, Jack has signed a death warrant for this thing he's poured his heart and soul into. Hi, Jack.
Hello.
When you were born, your mum, Bronwyn Bancroft, was already a well-known painter. How did that influence your early life?
I think there's all the research on the formative years being in that 0 to 5 and a lot of your cognitive capacity and your emotional capacity. And we were in movement. Like we were, I think at 6 weeks old, Mum opened a shop, Designer Aboriginals, and you know, she was on this like frontier lead with Aboriginal fashion, with I think the first Australian fashion designer to be shown in Paris with Euphemia Bostock and a couple of others. And then I was sitting in this shop window in like Balmain with this, you know, big coloured shop called Designer Aboriginals. And so, yeah, I think being in movement and being around colour and probably being a bit more honest than most people who follow whatever the rules are of what we were kind of told to do, that life's kind of just a bit more crazy, and it felt like I was probably open to the craziness in those 0 to 5 years.
Were you allowed to touch the paints?
No, we weren't allowed to touch Mum's paint. So Mum didn't have a studio until I was like 25 or something. I think was her first owned studio, or like early 20s, like when I was out of home. So our kitchen table was Mum's painting table, and yeah, so all the paints were sort of set up there, and we just kind of eat on the floor, and the whole house was like painted. Like you'd kind of, because she couldn't have a studio, maybe, or because of the energy of having 2 little kids, and she was, my dad was involved, but she's a primarily single mum with us, and so yeah, there were a couple of simple rules. Don't touch the paintings, don't touch the paints. And we were pretty good with that. There were other rules that we broke, but we didn't break those.
So what did her paintings look like through your eyes as a kid?
Universes. Mum built worlds. Like every painting is a world. And so I kind of have not quite understood where we get stuck in the rut, or stuck in our little boxes, and our labels and our aisles, and forget that we're on a planet in outer space, and it's spinning all the time, and it's a universe that we live in. And Mum painted those universes, and so that was our zoom out effect, from not even being conscious to the stages that we gain consciousness.
You were living in Balmain. What was it like to be growing up in Balmain at that point?
Yeah, I was born in 1985. The Balmain Tigers hadn't won a premiership since 1969. It was very empty at Leichhardt Oval, and we'd walk there often. That was a big part of like the town was the connection to like the Tigers. There's a really big history in Balmain. The Labor Party was formed there off the back of the union movement. There's really big housing commission. There's a big mixture of different cultures when we were growing up. And there's a bit of an edge. Like, you know, when I went to primary school, I remember, like, we had, you know, what we called lads, like, cruising around the streets, and, like, you're worried that you get rolled going home sometimes, like, in the day. And it's sort of, there was just a little bit of a fear of violence and that connection with the edge of not much money being around. And then there was new money coming in. So there's sort of, it's like pretty crazy Balmain Primary, like, for like a decade block. There's some really gnarly people that came out of that primary school, like Rose Byrne went there, Josh Pike went there, Yali and her brother and sister have all done all these, like, really gnarly things. Yellowstone is my partner and her brother and sister, and yeah, just like kooky peeps, you know, in this sort of period. And I think that's when, like, I really am drawn to that, those intersections, those spaces between cultures and between, you know, money and not money. And when there's that intersection, I think that's when humans are at our best, and most of our networks divide us to not be connected in those ways. And so I was lucky to grow up in Balmain during that time, I reckon.
Mm. Were you spending much time around blackfellas at that point?
Yeah, well, like, we are. So that's the, you know, I have my sister and my mum, and yeah, it's everywhere. Like, our backyard, I got 2 little kids, and I know now what it feels like when you're restricted with 2 little kids and you can't have that movement. And so Mum's house became the place for the joy and the party and the movement. And our backyard just had, you know, Mum founded Balmain with 10 other Aboriginal artists like Michael Riley, and Hetty Perkins was in that crew, and Tracy Moffat and Euphemia Bostock, and yeah, and like, you know, Hetty Perkins, just really gnarly big players that were going to shape the face of Aboriginal contemporary art in the last 20 or 30 years. And so it was, yeah, it was kind of like, again, there was an edge in the backyard. Like, you'd walk out there and people would be partying, and there'd be big conversations, there'd be energy moving. Their mum also looked after a lot of people who were struggling. Like, and we'd have, you know, she gave away any money that we've ever had to anyone that needed it. She gave away our house and space, and I think her generosity is, like, one of the most astounding things. Like, the lady will just give everything she's ever got to everybody, and particularly to other Aboriginal people that are in pain or struggling. So yeah, we and, you know, the shop's called Design Aboriginal. She had young Aboriginal women working in there that forged their careers in different ways. And so yeah, between the shop and then our little house on Lawson Street, the little colourful house in this weird urban spot, yeah, I feel like it was a bit of a refuge.
These are really heavy hitters of contemporary Aboriginal art and continue to be today. And I wonder how that shaped the way that you think, to be surrounded by all of this light and colour and movement.
It's not so much that people are fancy, it's that they're not disconnected from the enormity of what's going on. And so you could have people that were painting some of these, trying to take on the big challenges and the big stories, but then we could have someone at our house who's just like this homeless guy who's struggling to get by, who's an artist who's not going to be famous, or might not even be an artist that someone that mum wants to care for and look after, or someone coming through. And like my old man, you know, when we were at his house and when I was with him, like Dad's dad ran for the Labor Party, leaving like the Country Party, and came from this old, like, you know, private school world, was based out in Coonabarabran, and had Chifley tap him on the shoulder and asked him to run. And, you know, he cared about people. He didn't care just about the money and about staying in the club. And so you'd be around the dinner table with Dad and his brothers, and politics was really big. It was about who's doing the right thing, you know. And I remember watching Dad crying when Howard won in '96, like just crying and bawling, and more than he would like even watching a Tigers play. And you like, as a kid, I'm 11, 12 watching that. You're like, this matters, you know. These are things of consequence. Democracy matters. Inequity matters. People matter. And I think that wasn't lost in either of my homes that I got to grow up in.
I know you weren't allowed to touch your mum's paints. Were you a creative kid, though?
was super scared of painting because mum creates universes. So like you go into primary school, I remember being aware, maybe it's around 6 or 7, you start to get a little bit aware. Like mum came in and did this workshop at the school and we painted this mural of all the Balmain, and we painted, it was like a 10-metre mural that stayed on the back of the like assembly hall of what Balmain would have been like before colonisation. And all of us kids stamped our feet all over it and put our handprints all over it, and I could feel mum's shadow and I just wasn't good at it. And I was scared to not be good at things. And so if I drew something, I'm like, well, that doesn't look good, so I'm going to stop. And yeah, so I just sort of went, no, I'll just chase sport.
Where did you actually channel your energy into, if not painting?
Yeah, my outlet as a kid was just every sport possible. And I think Dad said it was like I was born with like a ball in my hand. If there were balls around, I was really happy and I could focus. And so I put my energy towards these balls to play with and to move, and cricket balls and soccer balls and tennis balls, and then I'd swim and ran and and it was really like sport has its limits, and in Australia there's not a lot of male role models that you can look up to who are soft and gentle, thoughtful and heroes. And I think that I definitely got swept up in the sport phenomenon and was like, well, I want to be good and I want to be liked and I want, to have power or influence or be not, a loser at school. And so, yeah, I want to be good at sport, and it just also eventually it gets in your body and you're like, it becomes a place that you can, that if the playing fields feel unfair, you can there's something in your control with sport, where if I work hard enough, I can win. And I might not be able to win in other places, but there's some levelling that happens in sport that I think drew me in as a young person and kept me there for quite a long time.
Mm. When you were about 10, your mum moved the family out of Sydney. Where did you go?
Yeah, we went to a place called Linesville, which is where our Aboriginal family's from. So it's about an hour and a bit inland of Grafton, in the sort of northern rivers catchment area of the Bundjalung Nation. And yeah, Mum was just like, I got to get out of the city and get back on country and have that connection. And so yeah, we went to Bar Eagle Primary School. It was like the Bar Eagle Mission's there, and there's about 40 houses, and then there's Mullaboogamah about 10 minutes away with about another 40 houses, and then there's just this one school, and then Linesville was about 10 minutes drive away from Bar Eagle. And like Bar Eagle was like a tough landscape, there's sort of dirt everywhere. The houses were like janky houses that were built by James Hardy, and they all had asbestos, and that eventually got redone. And it's sort of, I think that's the really dislocating thing about what happened with the displacement and the creation of missions is you could feel the in-between space of it all. You could feel the displacement of just being stuck between where everything was and then whatever's going to be next. And so I could feel that like there's magic and joy and kindness and love and pain and hurt and struggle, and then that was all kind of bundled into a little primary school with 2 classrooms that me and my sister went to. And I remember walking into Bar Eagle Primary, I think in the first week or first day, and just saying to the kids, "Oh, I'm Aboriginal too." And they're like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Yeah, I am." They're like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Yeah, I am." I said, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Well, Mum said we were." And then over the course of the few months, like me and my sister had the fairest skin there compared to this. And then the only other kid who had fairer skin than us, whose nickname was Snowy. And yeah, it became this like this identity work through of how the Bancrofts fit in to that ecosystem and where Linesville fits. And then we had some of the elders come in and talk and explain, and Mum explained But yeah, I think it's also part of the dislocation that so many Aboriginal people have faced, and all of these repercussions of what's happened over the last 100 to 200 years is there is not that coming together for many people. And so that confrontation was really challenging and important and has to happen. Like that process of understanding, you don't fit here, you're not from here, you haven't been here. That's the right thing for that kid to say. And me to go, but I think I am, but I don't know, And so then I think that time to come back together is in a lot of the places where we have this dislocation, we've got to keep working out how we reforge healthier pathways back together, and we find that coming together again, not just Indigenous people together, but Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and there's a much bigger coming together that we need with all the other species and the rest of the planet as well.
You're on your own country. You know that this is your country, and then you've got your classmates that are really challenging and questioning your Aboriginality. How did your family work through that with you?
Yeah, I think there's different responses. I think one of my uncles was like, just go punch kids in the head. And so there's violence and anger. But the point is, like, it's like a relationship to country takes time. Like it takes time, and I'm 10. So at best, if I was going through any version of any law, like I'm very, very young. And so I haven't spent the time there. And that's what the kid's saying. So it's, you haven't spent your time here, we don't know you. And that's I think, beyond healthy. The challenges are in displacement when you're in all these different areas. You're like, well, I live in the city, I don't get to go back here. And you don't get to come here, and we can't connect in those different ways. But I think the simplest, deepest part of it, like the deeper question, which I've asked throughout my life, is like, I don't think I get entitled to that country just because I'm born with a bloodline. I can't put a claim on saying, this is mine, I own this. I even think that like frame is dangerous, like what we've had to do with proving that we own country or we're traditional owners, like, is a bizarre idea. We're custodians, and to be in relation with the landscape and be in relation with people takes time and it takes effort, and you have to do the work. And if you do the work, that's a lifetime's body of work. And at 10, cool, I should be challenged, and at 13 and 14, we should be challenged. Like, we're young. And at 30 and 40, like, I'm still young. Like, I'm only just starting to learn some of the law stuff and like little bits here or there and patchwork from different teachers. And you shouldn't have access to everything everywhere. It's 60, 70,000, 80,000, 90,000, 100,000 years worth of knowledge and intelligence. Yeah, there should be a few security guards at the door being like, oi, how do you fit here?
You're so right. But I also wonder, that's a really hard concept for a kid to kind of come to on their own. Like, how did you come to have that understanding?
Well, I think you get that, like, the kid reaction is, oh my gosh, I'm scared. Or am I going to get hurt? Or am I under threat? Or am I a bad person? Like, that's the little kid reaction. Or am I a fraud? Or, yeah, I do have fair skin. Like, am I actually Aboriginal? Like, are they right? Maybe I'm, like, not really Aboriginal. Maybe I'm, like, they're all, the thoughts that are inside are the same thoughts that are outside that some people voice sometimes. And a lifetime of being a human is trying to learn the vocabulary to understand yourself before and after, which I suppose is part of what we're doing in this live national therapy session together. But yeah, I went into fantasy. Like, I couldn't play sport as much, so I just disappeared into fantasy books, and that was my okay, how do I go out this door over here and just go off into different worlds? And then I wrote letters to my dad, and just wrote these really long, rich letters, and then just found joy where I could find it.
How important was cricket to you at that point?
Yeah, cricket was like pretty important. It was just sport. I was obsessed with sport. And then having that pulled away, like, you don't realise living in a rural space or, like, an hour away from, like, the major town, that suddenly if I wanted to play sport, I'd have to be driven like 2-3 hours to play different games, and that just wasn't on the table with Mum at that stage, with the juggle with Ella and everything. And So just there wasn't that. And I had all this energy, which I didn't know what to do. So I'd kick a soccer ball with this dog, Lucky, who was a cattle dog of my great uncle Pat. And he would be the goalkeeper of this this steel fence and of our house, and I'd just be on the road, and it was awesome. Like, he was the best goalkeeper. So for hours I'd just do penalty shootouts with this dog, and he was like my best mate. And then I came home one day from school and I was like, Mum, where's Lucky? And then Uncle Pat said, oh, Lucky ain't so lucky anymore. And it shot Lucky in the head because he wasn't a good cattle dog. Good goalkeeper though. So yeah, I did that. I mowed my own little cricket pitch to bowl, but mainly I was restricted. Like, I couldn't move in the same way. And then when I got, like I said to Mum, I just got sad, and I felt that loss of that movement, and I felt like a version of depression, like a version of just being restricted and depressed and sad, and asked if I could go back and live with Dad. And then I went back and lived with Dad, and played sport and got back into the mix of everything. But I think the heaviness of the weight of what was in Bay Eagle, and the fact that I got to keep in movement, or I got to get that release out of that restricted space of stuckness, that definitely stayed with me as feeling like I got, survivor's guilt or something, like that I got to keep moving. There's no question that was a big part of what sort of came through and seeded some of the AIM work and everything that came later.
Then when you were finishing school, you got into Sydney Uni on a scholarship. What was the scholarship for?
They tried to set up a version of the Rhodes Scholarship for an Indigenous person in Australia. So it was a total experiment. There's the head of ANZ Bank hanging out at a Wallabies game, I think, with some fancy people from Sydney Uni, and they were like, we should do something to get an Indigenous leader. And I think maybe Andrew Walker's playing on the field at the time, and I think they thought they were just going to get another rugby player that could win a bunch of stuff for them. But I ended up getting it, and I remember walking into the scholarship interview, and there was Quentin Bryce was the head of Women's College, who went on to become a Governor General. There was the head of ANZ Bank was in the interview. There were these councillors of Sydney Uni. It was a pretty stacked, crazy old room to be in, up these old turrets of stairs I had to climb up. And they said, why do you want to, why should we give this to you? And I said, look, if you give it to me, I want to put something back, and if I do anything in my life, I want it to be big, or it's going to be big. And it was I remember walking out and then getting into our shitty car with Mum. She goes, how'd you go? I go, I got it. Jack, you can't say that. I'm like, no. I said the best line, Mum. I got it. And I did. And then at 17, I walked into this total social experiment of being at St Paul's College, which is the oldest residential college in the country, the club of the club of the clubs. You have to wear suits and ties and academic gowns to dinner 5 nights a week, like Harry Potter meets something gnarly. And I was being waited on for dinner, the 3-course meals. I was just like, whoa, what is this space? And then I was at uni, and I was hanging out at the Curry Centre with these really special generation of Aboriginal uni students that were I think the next wave, after Mum, and going, wow, this is magic. This is different. This is our next chapter of this stuff. And then trying to make sense in between all of that. Okay, how do I change this? How do I create the change that's needed, was what I kept asking myself at 17.
What was the answer?
The answer was a couple of things, I think. I looked at the coolest college parties, and I'm like, okay, at O Week, at orientation week, this sub-ski, this skiing club gets everybody because they ran the coolest party. And then you had Red Bull and the major brands, and you could see what they were doing. They were working it so hard to make this thing that they had this product have an edge. And then I looked at us going and marching in the streets, we were marching against the Iraq War. There were marches that were happening. And I remember going on them, and they just felt tinny. They felt like we were trying to be the Vietnam War movement, but we didn't have our generational thing to stand up for. And I could just see this detachment, this generation of non-Indigenous people who desperately, desperately wanted to relate to Aboriginal people, but didn't want to stuff it up and didn't want to make a mistake. So they're frozen. And then a generation of Indigenous people who are still being left behind systemically, And so, yeah, the goop was like, all right, we've got to make caring cool. So we've got to have like the coolest parties on campus. Like we need to get an edge to that to make it be a movement. And then I was just like studying everyone, like studying Mandela, studying like what had happened in the States, studying Gandhi, studying like what Charlie and Charlie Perkins and different people had done in Australia and the, you know, the Freedom Rides and 10 Embassy, and just like learning. And I felt like Mandela's vision that you had to make a vision that was big enough for everything. You know, you had to paint universes like Mum that everyone could fit into. So that felt like the goop. And I was limited because I was 17 and just starting this stuff. And so we started that in 2005, and the idea was like, yeah, how do you bridge between this generation of people at Paul's or all these other places that are going to go off and stay in their clubs? And how can you break that and create those paths together and those relationships and have a pathway for Indigenous kids to move through school and, you know, and have that option to go to uni and move in those different areas. So that was kind of the genesis of AIM in 2005.
So you wanted to take underutilised uni students and get them to mentor Indigenous kids at school to make it more likely for them to go to uni. Which school did you start out at?
It was about getting the kids to go to uni, but it was also about this dormant generation that needed to have a better spirit. You know, I don't ever think that Indigenous people that we're the ones that need to be fixed. It's about how do we shift the way we place value. And so the long game was like, how do you shift these university students and where they see their role in life? And our role in life should be like everybody, every single person listening, we should all be mentors. Like it's the healthiest fabric of civilization. It's where democracy started with Socrates, Aristotle and Plato. It's how ideas have moved. It's the essence of Indigenous systems which have lasted for 100,000 years here. And when we hold knowledge to ourselves and we're selfish, then our spirit and our connection generationally dies and we're not healthy in our networks. And so it's super simple. It's just like, this makes the mentors healthier. This makes the kids healthier because we connect the chains that are broken, and we need that everywhere. And then we went down to Alexandria Park Community School. We spoke to the kids. Me and Clark Webb were there. I remember standing there with Clarkie and they just said, oh, you just feel sorry for us, don't you? Like, that's why you want to do this program. And that's the point. Like, and Clark looked at me and said, yours. And I stumbled out something like what I just said before, which is, no, we don't feel sorry for you. These uni students have as much to learn as you do. And if it was about going in to fix the Indigenous problem, then we made a mistake at the beginning. Like, we're not problems to be fixed. We've been attacked for 200 years. Like, stop attacking us.
How many kids turned up to that first homework clinic?
Yeah, so the program ran in two forms. We'd bring kids out of school and then have experiences that we did around Sydney, and eventually the university became the hub for that. And then we were like, okay, said to the school, look, we'll give them these experiences to then help them be more engaged and see perspective and inspired to want to stay in school. And then for the time outside of class, we'll set up a homework club at the school to try and catch up on that. So we got a good turnout for all the cool activities like going to Taronga Zoo and doing all those other things. But the homework club was like, all right, is this thing going to actually move like the straight lines of the schoolwork stuff as well? And so I think I turned up in my shitty Ford Festiva 13 times in the first year at 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon with 3 volunteer uni students with red shirts driving around the corner, and we walked into like this cold sort of brick building and walked into the library and waited for an hour and no one turned up. And the second year I was like, okay, cool, that's 13 of those. And every time being like to the uni students, oh, it's okay, they're going to, like, I think we got to set the momentum. We'd see some of the kids, you coming today? Oh, no. Cool. And then the second year was like, oh, do we need a hook? Like, oh, so we moved it to another space, which was a bit more where the kids were leaving and where the school buses were. And so we had more conversations. And then I remember one kid starting to turn up in the second year. And he did like 3 sessions. And we didn't even do that much, but it felt enormous. It was like, okay, someone can meet us in the middle here. And they're willing to trust. And, 10 years on from that, we had hundreds of homework centres running around 300 plus schools across the country with, 7,000 Indigenous kids regularly engaged both in the uni program and the school program, and like it humming and moving through. That energy of those kids afterwards, like the movement 10 years later, is all built from the first 2 or 3 years of saying, how exposed will you be?
Just by turning up, you send a message. So 4 years into starting AIM, you had 40 schools, 5 unis, 500 Indigenous high school students, and more than 500 uni students volunteering. You became CEO when you were 22. How did you cope with the privilege that you saw at the college compared to the students at the schools?
The gap in my psyche was I got really angry at the guys at Paul's that I went to college with, and it's super easy, and it's, I think, the right thing, really, that if you've seen all of this pain and you're generationally from that, and my grandfather goes and fights in World War II and comes back and is not a citizen in Australia and has to drink at the, with the dogs out the back while his mates that he went and fought for this country for are in the front bar. And when that pain and that anger is lived, then it is right to have anger. So I forgive myself, or I understand why at 17 I blame some of those Paul's guys, and I blame the institution and I blame privilege. And at about 20, I remember just having this super big penny drop in my head where it was, I want these guys to change the way they think about Indigenous people and other people outside of their clubs. If I want them to change their views, to not think about where people have come from, but think about who they are now and where they can go to, then I have to do the same thing of them. I have to look at not where they've come from, but who they are now and where they can go to, what their movement can be afterwards. And that's what I took from Mandela. Like that's the path for me.
Are there particular stories of kids that have been part of AIM that have really stuck with you over the years?
Yeah, it's the classic question that I have very little interest answering, because it's it allows our brain to go into an individual story and place context. So I get it, and the punk in me is like, this isn't World Vision. So I want to let people have their space and their freedom, and I don't want to make heroes before they're ready. I want people to be able to do their thing and be ordinary or extraordinary. And it's not fair for me to pluck one kid out of 25,000 and say, this kid's awesome. Like, I believe in our intelligence as a species, full stop. I believe in Indigenous intelligence, full stop. I see extraordinary potential which has been diminished from Indigenous people systemically, and that has to change and is changing. And the wave is moving, and we have a serious amount of work to do. What I'm more interested in than plucking out the one or two heroes that have done stuff in the last 20 or 30 years that are interesting, or the 25,000 that have done extraordinary things. I want to know what we're going to do in this next decade for human beings as the clock's ticking on the temperature rising, on automation, on food shortages, on network breakdowns, and I want to see the visions of what it's going to look like to live healthily on planet Earth. That's all I'm interested in. If that comes from a young Indigenous kid or it comes from an established Prime Minister, that's the wave that all of this collectively has to drive towards.
So you took AIM International in 2016. You went to America to start the process. Why did you want to do that at that point, knowing that you were stepping out of your comfort zone?
I really believe that being a mentor is close to the highest calling of a human being. So the moment I put that mentor shirt on in 2005, I felt the immense responsibility of that position description. Your job is to be a guide. In 2016, I'm watching 40% of US jobs gone in a decade. I'm watching crazy climate change challenges. I'm seeing disruptions from these social networks that are sickening and are making us sicker and sicker and sicker. I'm seeing huge inequality rising around the world and dislocation with democracy, which we've then seen play out in the last 10 years. And going, well, I'm responsible. I'm a mentor. I can't say to these kids, hey, I can help you and not help everybody else. And I also know that by helping everybody else, we have to help everybody. We have to help everything. So it's not a one-way gig. It's not I help Indigenous kid and then therefore game over. No, this is an interchange. Like, if we are going to do this, then we all have to be responsible. We all have to be mentors. And I couldn't look at these kids when we were getting all of this direct feedback that said we were awesome, and I was getting like Young Australian of the Year awards and different things and all the stuff that makes you feel like you've made it, and say, hey, it's all perfect. You're going into university. Keep going to university when there's not going to be any jobs in 15 years' time, when you're going to have huge anxiety and dislocation from humanity, when you're going to have this huge AI thing come down the mountain you're not going to know how to do. And actually what we're going to need is your Indigenous knowledges of nature are going to be the most important skill. And I'm putting you on a little lemming production line to go and just be like everybody else. So that's number one. And then number two is I was convinced that we needed something different to Facebook. And that's what I thought we'd started in 2005. We'd done it offline. We'd gone one by one. We'd built trust with people. We'd turned up to the homework centres. We'd felt the pain of that, being alone. We've felt the joy of being connected. We've felt the feelings of not being trusted. We've felt racism like in our face. We've felt all of the other feelings. And technology networks that just spin up in an isolated cube with no moral guidance, no mentor headline, no governance structures that look at responsibility for people, and then just sell our data for advertising. That's the sickness of our time. And I thought that we could build something in parallel that could show a different way to work together as human beings, and that if we could fix the network, we could fix the planet and we could fix inequity. And then it would hopefully put Indigenous people from Australia as a nice bonus, smack bang in the centre of the global stage to be the start of the next generation of designers. And that, I think, will be hopefully one of the biggest moves on alleviating Indigenous inequity that we've had. And so, yeah, that's why.
How did Americans take to that idea?
So that's 10 years ago. All I knew, the vocab-wise, at that point was like, oh, we're going to change the world. So that's it. We think we can help. Like, I remember standing on a stage at Chelsea Piers and Yael Stone I'd met, re-met as a grown-up there, and asked her to help out with this event. And she was on this show, Orange is the New Black, and so she invited some of her fancy peeps, and she helped fill that room. And I remember saying in that stage, in that room, on that night, we sang From Little Things, Big Things Grow Together. And I said, look, I don't know exactly how we can change the entire world, but I think as we keep separating, and it was in the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, which was coming out of New York, and if we keep separating from each other, I don't believe we can find a way. And we have worked on bringing people together in Australia for the decade, and we want to help bring the world together. And the scary part was, we then had to start saying, we then don't actually know what that looks like. So is it that we just transplant the mentoring model into universities, which we did in the continent of Africa, and we tried that. We rolled out a golden ticket program because I like Willy Wonka. And you just start trying the same sort of thing as the homework centre at the beginning. It's just like, what does this look like here? And in New York, it was brutal. It was so bad. I've done this startup thing. I've CEO at 22. I've done the beg, borrow, steal stuff. I've done the stuff as where no one talks to you and you look like an idiot and they laugh at you through their eyes. And I've done that. And then I've gone and put myself in one of the biggest cities in the world as an absolute nobody, with no one in New York even knew what an Indigenous person was, and from Australia. There's no Aboriginal. What are you talking about? And you're meant to be black, and all through this stuff. And Americans don't want anything but American ideas.
What you're talking about is so big and so important, that kind of world-shifting narrative. But what's the cost to you as a person to keep going in those moments?
The cost to me is it Atlas that tries to hold the world up, or
Atlas with the world on his shoulders.
It hurts. It's not natural. And so there's been lots of periods of just so much physical, emotional, spiritual stress, which is me stretching to grow, to get to we've got to try and get to be helpful. And yeah, the pressure's been immense. I've had like proper drops into depression of just feeling like, you know, when we've organised things that haven't worked out and there's been these race breakdowns of conversations between people from different cultures and it's become reductive and it's just all been about who's less black or more black. And I knew that I stuffed it up because I stuffed the framing up because we were still thinking about, you know, changing the world was a black and white paradigm. And then being depressed for 3 or 4 months and coming out of that, like that was like 2019, and going, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, and I'm looking at this thing that was like drilling it in Australia, and it's like pretty clean understanding from most people about it. And I've then broken it to try and take on the world to help, you know, and we have, and there's a lot of people have come with us to do that. And I'm not going to make it, you know, and that, I think that's been the, like, pretty early on in The Simpsons, there's an episode where Bart tries to ride a skateboard across the gorge, and I remember Homer going, I'll ride it for you, and it's this amazing moment. He goes to ride across the gorge, and he, like, midway, he's like, I'm going to make it, and then he jumps up and down like as he's going to make it, and then he drops and falls and ends up like bashing his body everywhere, and then there's this roll-on skit as he falls out the ambulance and whatnot. But the feeling of like, I'm not going to make it to the destination, and the pain for me is like so deep, because I'm trying to do the right thing, and to do that I've had to break something that was supporting people directly, and I had to try and say, hey, give me 5 or 10 years, I'll be back. But for now I'm going to disappoint you, and I'm going to ask you to do more, and I'm going to ask you to do more, because this direct delivery model isn't going to change everything. But if we can shift economies and we can shift the way we move and we can work at a systems level and get to this playground, like, we might get there. But yeah, it's a fundamentally horrifying thing to be lost, and to be knowingly lost, and then to have to surrender in that and work out all your own stuff and all your own problems that are blocking you from hearing the signals properly, and then being able to to keep going, to keep turning up. It's the coolest thing to get found, you know, and I think we built the world's first digital country. Like, we've built what I believe is like engineered as a very different alternative to these social networks, and we've created an economy based on hoodies, and we've got these crazy tools that we're going to roll out to the world that will help change the world. And, you know, 10 years ago in 2016, I had no idea how to change the world. And now, like, hand on heart, I can look at you and go, yeah, I know how to do this now. Mm-hmm. You know, I know how I can help, and I know how we can help, and what we've got is going to help. And that's the gift and torture of painting universes. Yeah, so I'm feeling closer to the other side now than falling down the gorge like Homer.
So, Jack, you've now signed a death warrant for AIM.
Yeah, so we signed a death date for AIM when we launched Imagination as a digital country, and I wrote this book, Hoodie Economics, as part of that that deep dive. And in designing Imagination, we were asking all these questions like, okay, what do you do if you're building the alternative to Facebook? How do we design more healthier playgrounds and movements? And then I remember one day someone being like, heck, we've webbed all these Indigenous systems into this. We've thought about the container. We've thought about how this is going to run. They were like, what if this works? Do you want to be like Zuckerberg, Jack? You know, and I was like, no, I really don't. And I remember looking out of my garage, because we're still in pandemic times, and looking at these trees. And we just kept coming back to Indigenous systems and to nature. And I was like, well, everything lives and dies. So what if we set a death date in terms of governance? Why don't we set a death date for this digital country? Why don't we give it 10 years from when we birth it? And then I'd wanted to kill AIM for about 10 years as well. I feel like the whole idea that the non-profit sector should just like hold up all of the rest of the sectors is sick. And I think every organisation should die. I think we hide from our own mortality by calling organisations perpetual and never-ending, this lives forever, and pretending like these things live forever. They always decay, they always die anyway. What we miss out on is we're not mentors in our organisation, so we don't intentionally get our knowledge into tool formats that can be passed on. And I could feel I couldn't work out the puzzle of how do you run a movement, how do you really get the movement to keep singing, like to regenerate itself. And I was like, oh man, if we kill it, it's game on. Like we'll have 10 years, we'll probably do more in the 10 years than we would have done in 40. We'll have a focus on tools, and most importantly, like it's honest, it's what built the universe and it's what built life on Earth. A star explodes. And so the explosion then of that constellation of work then leaves all this space for this really natural reformation. And so it feels like at least that feels right. I'm like, cool, I know that's the right thing to do. It's super hard to convince and share that with everyone and find the language. But now we're like, every organisation should die. Every organisation should have a death date. And that's part of one tool of what we think we can leave behind in the next 7-8 years is if that lever happens alone, then you shift the whole behaviour with risk. Board of directors, everybody shifts this whole behaviour with risk, which came from like the 19th century, from these like, it was the right thing in the UK, in like Britain, because directors were ripping off people running companies and they weren't responsible if something went under. But now we're so risk adverse. Like, why would you save for a rainy day when there's a pandemic? Why are you saving for a rainy day when we have a 7-year clock on this climate challenge? What are you saving for? It's raining. So use it. The challenge is design. Our governance systems are so afraid of risk, and our board of directors are so scared they're going to get sued and lose their houses, that nobody will spend what needs to be spent now. But if you have a death date, then you're like, oh no, we're out. This isn't about us collapsing. This isn't about poor governance. This is intentional, us working towards us dying as an organisation in 10 years or 15 years. And I keep saying dying because we have to say dying, because humans die. We need better vocab around death and our relationship with death. And if we can say death and we can bring that into our colour and what we do, and organisations model it, then organisations are actually natural. And then we have a better chance of running economies in a healthier way.
Mm. Jack, I'm really struck by the fact that we started our conversation today reflecting on how scared you were to fail at art. So scared that you didn't want to pursue it in any real meaningful way. You seem to have become quite comfortable with the idea of taking big swings regardless of whether they work or not.
I think the gift for me was realising that imagination is everything. Imagination is absolutely everything. That's the intervention. That's the beginning of human thought. That's what makes us special. And, you know, we lose, I think NASA did a study on imagination that 97% of 5-year-olds have a genius level of imagination and 3% of 35-year-olds. We lose it. And that fear I had as a kid was a fear of my own imagination, a fear of being lost, a fear of not being in control, a fear of being unsafe, a fear of not knowing the destination. And that fear you can train. What I wanted to test in myself was, can I train this? You know, if I go and paint now as a 30-year-old, can I train through that feeling? Or if I puppeteer, if I move in different ways, like, can imagination, is it a practice? Is it just like training for cricket or for swimming or for tennis? And I've learned it is, like, and we've learned that it is as well. And so when it's in context and you realise that those universes my mum's painting are just the universe and we are in the universe, then of course you paint. I'm alive in like outer space. I'll play with paint. I can say yes to anything. Like live on a rock in outer space. If I'm in my head and I'm just myself and I'm scared of the score or I'm scared of the outcomes or who I'm meant to be or my identity or my race or my background or my trauma, like I'm scared. I'm running scared. And all I want for human beings is freedom. And that part I feel like I've started to be able to access in the last 5 to 10 years from being in these relationships with so many people, and to know what's real and what's not real, and being able to express and share stories and to try is fun. What
do you think young Jack would think of all the work you've done to help change the world?
Yeah, I think I'm in a pretty good relationship with young Jack. I think, get to the death date, and then, I can chill out for a bit. I just finish. Like, I think that's the part which haunts me. I remember interviewing Taika Waititi once for the mentoring TV show that we did for the kids, and he just said, "Finish what you start." So I think young Jack could say, "Finish it."
Jack Manning Bancroft, thank you so much for joining me on Conversations.
All good. Thanks for having me.
My guest today was Australian Indigenous Mentoring Experience founder and CEO Jack Manning Bancroft. If you'd like to hear more Manning family stories, Jack's dad Ned was on the program a few years ago. You can find a link to that interview in the show notes. This episode of Conversations was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people. The producer was Alice Moldovan. Conversations' executive producer is Nicola Harrison. I'm Rudy Bremer. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.